Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Liz Henderson. She's Global Head of Climate Risk Advisory and the Head of Catastrophe Analytics for the Americas at Aon Reinsurance Solutions. And Andy Neal is a Managing Director of Aon Public Sector Partnership. It's good to have you both with us. And Andy, we're going to start with you because what we should note is that you spent a long time at FEMA as the chief actuary. So you had a long-term look at risks and so forth. Tell us about actuarial science, how it applies to this whole idea of trying to predict climate effects, and how that is really central to an agency's mission.
So at the National Flood Insurance Program, the component of FEMA, where I was chief actuary, we had to figure out what is the risk that our policyholders face. And we think about that at two levels. One, how do we think about the risk that each individual home or each individual policyholder, what is the risk they're exposed to? And then how do we think about the risk overall? How does it accumulate for the National Flood Insurance Program? And how do we make sure that the program is sustainable, both today and into the future? And one of the things that amazed me when I was at FEMA is that the federal workforce is incredibly organized around the mission that they have. And they're passionate about it. And I loved being part of that mission, part of that passion. And when it comes to that, we are stewards of the programs that Congress has implemented, that they've given us the statutory authority to carry out. And with that stewardship comes care. And part of care is understanding the risks you're exposed to. Now, in the federal government, there's all kinds of requirements to look at your risk. You know, almost every agency has an enterprise risk management department or component. They have all kinds of things from A123 standards to GAO audits and other requirements that say, hey, you need to look at your risk. Tell us what your risk is. But it's bigger than that. Knowing your risk is an essential part of carrying out your mission.
And the idea of actuarial science applied to this predictive and understanding science implies that you need to have a long view.
Yes. So we do have to think about the exposure, what it is today, how it's going to change tomorrow. But most agencies don't have actuaries. You're kind of a needle in a haystack in the federal government being an actuary, and agencies don't have to have their own actuaries. They can either use outside actuaries, outside risk modelers, but there's also ways in which you can build up teams within your organization. So even if you don't have that skill set today, there's a way to start building it up, both inside and using outside help to do that.
And one way to do that, we'll turn to Liz now, is Aon has launched a climate risk advisory team. I imagine that is something that an agency could avail itself of to build up that expertise and get the chops going that they need to know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Part of the driving reason that we decided to launch climate risk advisory was driven by client demand and increasing focus across a wide set of industries on climate risk. How do you build programs to respond to the changing climate and the impact that climate change is having on our day-to-day experience? At Aon, we have a long history of helping our clients understand risk broadly, but very specifically, helping our insurance company clients to price, monitor, underwrite, and optimize their businesses around catastrophe and climate risk. And as we were watching kind of a broader set of our economies start to wrangle with the challenges of climate change that increasing losses have had on our on communities, on our economy, on the insurance industry itself, we recognized that all of this great insight that insurers have today on modeling climate-related risks is really kind of locked up within that industry itself. And there's a massive need for that knowledge and that expertise to be accessed by federal agencies, regulators, financial institutions, communities, and individuals, because the increasing need to have data-driven decisions is so critical when you're in an environment where risk is changing quickly and where volatility is driving, investments and decisions in ways that we are not really fully understanding yet. And so climate risk advisory is here to bring that insight to a wider set of clients to unlock that insurance insight and being able to quantify risk and bring it to individuals and communities, as well as different federal agencies, to increase and accelerate the education needed to really make informed decisions on how are we going to handle climate risk.
And in the engagements that you have had so far, and maybe concentrating on the federal sector for a bit, what is the knowledge gap that they most often have? What do they most need, do you find, to be able to build that data-driven and quantifiable risk profile that is useful over time?
I think I put this under one umbrella called uncertainty. Oftentimes when we're grappling with a challenge like climate change, we're trying to drill down to a single answer or a single number that helps us to quantify what our risk is. And what we've observed is that, climate change is a long-term problem. It is something we are going to be grappling with over decades. And when regulators are asking people to disclose their climate risk, everyone very quickly goes to look at what is my risk in the future? How is my risk going to change over 20, 30, 40 years? But what actually is really, really important, and we find a significant gap, is that people don't even really understand what their risk is today. And so starting with that baseline view, getting experience in using the type of modeling data that helps you to answer what is my baseline view is a really key first step. The other thing that I think is really critical is that, there is a multiple of different ways that we can answer the question, what is my climate change risk? And uncertainty in the different methodologies, the different vendors, the different solutions that are available is really key to understand, because many times somebody who is trying to answer the question, what is my climate change risk? They're going to be faced with vendors who come in and say, my model is the right number, or my model answers the right question. And the reality is that all of the models are really valid and strong and useful tools, but there is no one answer that's going to give you the best outcome. You have to understand the range of outcomes that are possible. You have to know and recognize that there's uncertainty in any prediction, especially something as complex as climate-related risks. I mean, we all have had the experience of the weatherman telling us it's going to rain and then the sun is shining. Weather forecasting is really challenging, and climate forecasting is just as challenging. And so being able to quantify the range of uncertainty and create a program that helps you to articulate that uncertainty to your stakeholders and to regulators is really key. And I always challenge people when we start the conversation around climate-related risks. One, do you understand what your baseline risk is today? And two, are you comfortable with the amount of uncertainty that exists within any single approach? And if we can start to answer those questions, it really helps agencies to accelerate their education around climate-related modeling.
Well, Andy, let me ask you, putting on that FEMA hat again for just a moment, when confronted with this array of possible outcomes, possible risk profiles that are available from the different sources and so on, how do you kind of mitigate and get to a point of understanding that you feel is reliable? You can't just average all the answers. That would be one way to do it. And you can't do it as a kind of public opinion poll. Well, here's the mean, median, and mode of opinions, what we're getting, what we're paying for. So let's pick these 6. I mean, how do you really inculcate multiple and conflicting or differing answers?
Well, there's a couple approaches you need to think about there. One is that to set an expectation that you're not going to be able to snap your fingers, run a model today, and have an answer tomorrow. Using these models, using the data sets around climate, around catastrophe, it is a journey. It's not something where you can just, where you're going to get a fast answer and be done with the analysis. It's something where the models are developing, the science is developing, the understanding is developing, and you have to start into it. And so one of the important first steps is to actually get that baseline view that Liz talked about. And you can start with a single model, but as you use that single model, know that it is not giving you necessarily a central estimate, but it's giving you one view of the risk. I would encourage everyone to think about saying, okay, I'm going to look at this marketplace of models and data and science within the federal government, outside the federal government, and I'm going to try to employ as many of those as I can so I can understand what I need to do. Now, for me and my team at FEMA, this was a multi-year journey. It's not something we did overnight. We had outside expertise from people like Liz, from others in the insurance industry at first, but we were also able to develop our own view of risk. And that's important for a federal agency. You can't outsource the decision-making around your risk. You do have to own it. So people like Liz, like the group that I've joined, we can come alongside and help people, not just to figure out their risk for them, but to help them own that understanding of risk. There's a phrase in the modeling community called developing a view of risk. When I started that at FEMA, I and my team, we were a little bit confused by how do I even know how to think about what a view of risk is? Experts helped us. Eventually, we actually FEMA stands on its own 2 feet. They have catastrophe modelers. They have their own ability to run the risk and understand it independently. All throughout the entire evolution of this, our team had to do deep dives into the understanding of the models, the data, to make sure we were familiar with it so that we could make decisions all along about how to employ these models.
And it must be also important to take data from actual catastrophes in the here and now, because the model might have said, well, this is going to be the cost of this. And you find out, well, this was really the cost of this. That data has to be fed in. That's past data that can actually help the future model.
Yes, we used whatever data we could. Actuaries, modelers, we are data hungry people. It's important not to just take a model out of the box and say, I'm done. This is an answer. But you do need to evaluate it. You need to stress it. And the way that it's going to apply to your business may be subtly different than it would apply to another. And there are ways that we look at historical performance to guide our usage of the models.
Yeah, Liz, it almost sounds like making sculpture. You never quite finished. You're always touching it up here and there and so on. What do you plan to do to keep developing your climate risk advisory such that it stays current and also is more smart over time?
That's a great question. And I love what Andy just said too about how, we're data hungry and we're always learning around how to develop that view of risk. And I think, one thing that we constantly focus on is that you have to have a holistic view of risk. And so that means you might be identifying areas where models are strong and can help you really quantify the risk. But there are also sources of loss that the models are not contemplating, like the impact of inflation on the costs and goods and services, the impact of litigation and liability on how easy and quick it is to rebuild after disasters. So that constant learning is really key as you're developing a view of risk. And when you have a resilient risk framework, you can weather those types of changes over time. You can easily absorb new information as it comes in. For us, one of the key focus areas as we develop our capabilities is to really bring in the latest academic research that we can get our hands on. And so we've partnered with 14 different universities globally, and several here in the US, Columbia University, UCLA, UC Merced, University of Illinois, and University of Central Michigan. And what we're doing with these academic partnerships is to actually fund that helps us to better understand how climate change, the broad concept of global mean temperatures rising due to the concentration of carbon in our atmosphere, taking that broad concept and actually drilling it down to understand what impact will it have on natural disasters? How much more frequent can I expect hurricanes to form, wildfires to burn, tornadoes to form and impact our exposures in our communities? And that emerging area of science is really something that we're bringing directly to our clients so they can start to build the most recent findings into what is their view of risk and adapt things as the research becomes more credible and more stable to implement those findings directly into the metrics they're using to make decisions. I mean, this is always going to be an area of evolving research, and it's always going to be an area where there's oftentimes not consensus early on, but consensus builds over time. And
Sure.
the most sophisticated risk managers will be able to absorb and make decisions based on the data as it becomes available.
Okay, and Andy, I guess we'll give you the final question for 30 seconds. Having been in industry and in the federal government, you've seen catastrophe from both sides now, as the old song goes. Best advice for program managers to start to understand climate risk, regardless of whether they're in the catastrophe business or whatever mission it might be?
Well, I'd say the first thing you have to do is don't stick your head in the sand around this topic and don't think you're going to treat it lightly. So don't just say, well, I'll use a really superficial data set just to check some box on whether it's my climate action plan or some other kind of form I'm filling out. Instead, dig in deep. Take the time and build your resources to understand your risk. And why should you do that? You should do that because you care about the mission of your organization. You care about the clients of that mission, whether it's taxpayers in a particular state or who benefit from what it is your agency, your department is doing. And keep that mission in mind and then focus on how can I understand what climate is going to mean to me? So take a first step. And if you're not sure about how to take a first step, get some outside help, but know that you can also build up your own resources and you're going to be able to answer these kinds of questions. So the things that we wrestle with today, the science is going to improve and your ability to navigate that is going to improve. And it's a great way for you to be able to take your organization and have confidence where you're not going to be caught by surprise. You're not going to be called to the floor of Congress to say, what happened here? You'll be able to say, look, we looked at this and we knew things like this could happen. And now here it is, this has happened, but we had a plan for what to do about it. So this is about resilience of your mission, not just for today, but even for that next generation. I think about my kids every day when I come in here. They are upset with what our generation has done and they want us to fix it. So I'm trying to do my part with Aon.
Andy Neal is a managing director of Aon Public Sector Partnership. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And we also heard from Liz Henderson. She's Global Head of Climate Risk Advisory for the Americas at Aon Reinsurance Solutions. I'm Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Aon Solutions.